Good evening and welcome. The war in Ukraine continues to reshape modern warfare, and today we're examining one of the most significant developments to emerge from the conflict: a new Ukrainian drone that's causing serious problems for Russian forces far behind what Moscow considered safe territory. Ukraine has just deployed a weapon system that military analysts believe could fundamentally alter the tactical landscape of this war. Developed by the Ukrainian defense technology company Firepoint, the FP2 drone represents a critical advancement in Kyiv's ability to project force across the battlefield. What makes this system particularly noteworthy is not just its capabilities, but the timing of its arrival and the strategic gap it fills in Ukraine's arsenal. The FP2 is what defense experts call a mid-range strike platform. With an operational range of 200 kilometers, it sits perfectly between the short-range first-person view drones that have become ubiquitous along the front lines and the long-range systems Ukraine uses to strike targets deep inside Russian territory. This 200-kilometer reach means Ukrainian operators can now threaten Russian logistics centers, command posts, fuel depots, and troop concentrations that previously operated with relative impunity in what they believed was a secure rear area. But range alone doesn't tell the full story. The FP2 carries a payload of 105 kilograms of explosives. To put that in perspective, that's roughly 231 pounds of destructive force delivered in a single strike. This represents anywhere from 10 to 20 times the explosive capacity of the standard FPV drones that Ukrainian forces use to hunt tanks and armored vehicles near the contact line. The dramatically increased warhead weight means the FP2 isn't designed to pick off individual vehicles. Instead, it's built to demolish buildings, obliterate supply dumps, destroy fuel storage facilities, and eliminate hardened structures that smaller drones simply cannot damage effectively. Firepoint has made the FP2 available in two distinct configurations, each optimized for different tactical scenarios. The first variant features an autonomous guidance system designed for attacking stationary targets. Ukrainian operators can input precise coordinates, launch the drone, and let it navigate itself to the target area. This fire-and-forget capability is particularly valuable for striking fixed installations like warehouses, headquarters buildings, or known ammunition storage sites, where the target location is well established and unlikely to change. The second variant incorporates manual control through a radio data link, functioning similarly to the FPV drones that have proven so effective throughout this conflict. This configuration allows a Ukrainian operator to guide the FP2 in real time, making it suitable for engaging moving targets or ensuring pinpoint accuracy against stationary objectives that might require last-second adjustments. The ability to manually pilot the drone also provides operators with flexibility in dynamic battlefield situations where intelligence might be imperfect or conditions change rapidly. From a production standpoint, Firepoint made a clever engineering decision when designing the FP2. The drone shares a very similar architecture with its predecessor, the FP1, which Ukraine already uses for strikes at much longer ranges. The FP1 can travel up to 1,400 kilometers, making it suitable for hitting targets deep inside Russia itself. By maintaining design continuity between these two systems, Firepoint can leverage existing production infrastructure, supply chains, and manufacturing processes that are already optimized for the FP1. This standardization dramatically accelerates how quickly the company can ramp up FP2 production and get new units to the front lines. In a conflict where timing matters enormously, this production efficiency could prove just as important as the drone's tactical capabilities. The company has also developed mobile launch systems configured to resemble standard military trucks. These platforms allow Ukrainian forces to move FP2 operations anywhere across the battlefield or position them in rear areas inside Ukrainian-controlled territory. The mobility of these launch systems enhances the already impressive range of the drone itself. Operators can drive the launcher closer to Russian positions, reducing the distance the FP2 needs to travel and potentially extending its effective reach even further into occupied areas. Now, let's talk about cost, because in modern warfare, economics matter tremendously. Each FP2 costs approximately $55,000 to produce. At first glance, that might seem expensive, but consider what you're getting for that price. A platform that can deliver over 100 kilograms of explosives accurately to a target 200 kilometers away. Compare that to precision-guided missiles or other strike systems with similar range and payload capacity, many of which cost several times as much or even orders of magnitude more. The FP2 delivers battlefield effects similar to much more expensive weapon systems at a fraction of the cost. This economic calculation becomes even more significant when you examine what Ukraine has already accomplished with low-cost drone technology. Earlier this year, Ukrainian forces conducted an operation that military planners are now studying carefully. In what became known as Operation Spiderweb, Ukrainian teams smuggled relatively inexpensive FPV drones into Russia using civilian cargo vehicles. These drones, which can cost as little as $400 per unit, were then launched against several Russian military airfields. The results were devastating. Ukrainian strikes damaged or destroyed strategic bombers worth tens of millions of dollars each, with total damage estimates reaching approximately $7 billion. Think about that equation: $400 drones causing $7 billion in damage. That's an economic warfare calculation that no military planner can ignore. The same principle applies to the FP2, just at a different scale. Yes, $55,000 per drone is more expensive than the cheapest FPV systems. But when you're using that $55,000 platform to destroy fuel depots, ammunition stockpiles, or logistics centers worth millions of dollars, the economic math still heavily favors Ukraine. And every time Russia has to replace destroyed equipment, repair damaged facilities, or rebuild supply networks, it drains resources from a war effort that's already pushing the Russian economy to its limits. And make no mistake, Russia's economy is under enormous strain. Last year, the Russian Minister of Economic Development, Maxim Reshetnikov, warned publicly that Russia was approaching the brink of recession. During an economic conference in St. Petersburg, he noted that business sentiment indicators showed the economy was cooling off significantly. Russian economic growth, which exceeded 4% in 2024, is projected to fall to around 1% in 2025. President Putin has tried to spin these numbers as somehow being part of a deliberate plan. But independent economists widely view this as the inevitable result of unsustainable military spending. Russia has poured hundreds of billions of dollars into what the Kremlin still euphemistically calls its special military operation. That spending has propped up certain sectors of the Russian economy, particularly defense manufacturing, but it's creating enormous distortions and long-term vulnerabilities. Russia faces critical labor shortages, with wages increasing faster than productivity. Sanctions have disrupted supply chains and made it harder for Russian companies to source critical components. The Russian government is essentially borrowing from the future to fund the present war effort, and that's a strategy with a very limited shelf life. For Ukraine, weapons like the FP2 represent a way to exploit Russia's economic vulnerabilities. Every expensive Russian asset that Ukraine destroys with a relatively inexpensive drone forces Moscow to spend resources it can increasingly ill afford. It's death by 1,000 cuts, and those cuts are adding up. Russia may struggle to sustain current levels of military production and equipment replacement if this asymmetric cost equation continues. Ukraine faces its own economic challenges, of course. The war has devastated large portions of the country's economy. Government revenues have declined while military spending has necessarily increased. Some economic analyses have suggested that Ukraine could face severe fiscal problems, even in the event of a ceasefire, potentially requiring cuts to military spending of up to 80% to balance the budget. International support, including potential loans backed by frozen Russian assets, may provide some relief, but the economic pressure on Kyiv remains intense. This context makes the FP2's cost-effectiveness even more critical. Ukraine cannot match Russia's economy in absolute terms. The Russian Federation, despite its current problems, still has a much larger economic base and resource pool to draw from. Ukraine's path to maintaining viable defense capabilities lies in asymmetric approaches, systems that achieve disproportionate effects relative to their cost. The FP2 embodies this philosophy perfectly. The drone has already seen combat action, and the results suggest it's performing exactly as designed. On November 2nd, Ukraine's security service, known as the SBU, conducted a series of precision strikes using FP2 drones against Russian positions in occupied territory. The targets were multiple military warehouses and bases that Russian forces use for logistics and distribution of supplies to units operating along the front lines. The SBU released video footage showing several large explosions at what appear to be substantial military facilities. Some of the footage appears to have been recorded by the drones themselves as they approached their targets, providing a first-person perspective on the attacks. These strikes were carried out by Ukraine's Alpha Special Forces, one of the most elite units in the Ukrainian military. Alpha Group specializes in asymmetric warfare, special reconnaissance, direct action missions, and long-range strikes. They've been involved in some of the most sensitive and successful operations of the war. The fact that Alpha was chosen to conduct some of the first operational deployments of the FP2 suggests Ukrainian military leadership wanted to ensure the new system was properly employed and its capabilities fully demonstrated. The November 2nd strikes weren't isolated incidents. The very next day, November 3rd, the SBU launched additional FP2 attacks, this time with more specific targeting information available. Ukrainian forces hit a pair of logistics facilities in Luhansk Oblast, both regularly used by Russian troops. Near the city of Dovzhansk, Ukrainian drones struck a fuel and lubricants distribution point. The destruction of fuel supplies has cascading effects. Trucks can't move supplies, armored vehicles can't maneuver, and generators can't power communications equipment. Near the village of Roskishne, Ukrainian forces destroyed a warehouse that served as a logistics support hub for Russian occupation forces. Again, video footage confirmed that the strikes hit their intended targets. The Dovzhansk strike occurred approximately 150 kilometers behind the current front lines. The Roskishne target was about 90 kilometers behind Russian forward positions. These are not opportunistic attacks on targets close to the contact line. These are deliberate strikes deep in what Russia considered its secure rear area, hitting the logistical infrastructure that keeps Russian combat units supplied and operational. This represents exactly the sort of warfare that defense analysts believe Ukraine must pursue. Russian forces generally maintain numerical superiority in terms of personnel and equipment. Confronting them in straightforward force-on-force engagements plays to Russia's strengths. But by using the FP2 to systematically degrade Russian logistics, Ukraine forces Moscow to fight with less fuel, fewer supplies, and degraded support networks. Russian soldiers arriving at the front lines are weakened before they even make contact with Ukrainian defensive positions. When those degraded Russian units do attack, they face Ukrainian FPV drones and anti-tank weapons operating against troops who lack adequate supplies, support, and coordination. This is what military theorists call a layered or multi-domain approach. Ukraine uses long-range systems to strike deep targets inside Russia itself. The FP2 hits mid-range targets in occupied territory and Russian rear areas. FPV drones and artillery engage targets along the immediate front lines. Layered defenses intercept Russian drones and missiles. Each layer serves a distinct purpose, and together they create an integrated system that's far more effective than any single capability operating in isolation. Ukraine is innovating in other ways as well. The Ukrainian military has developed what can only be described as a gamification system for drone warfare. Through a platform called the Brave One Store, Ukrainian drone operators earn points based on their combat performance. They can then use those points to purchase additional drones, equipment, and weapons from an online catalog featuring over 100 different systems. It sounds almost absurd when you first hear it. War as a video game with rewards and upgrades. But the results speak for themselves. According to Ukrainian sources, drone teams competing in this points-based system killed or wounded approximately 18,000 Russian soldiers during the month of September alone. The number of drone units participating in the program jumped from 95 in August to 400 by late in the year. The gamification approach serves multiple purposes. It provides incentive structures that encourage effective performance. It allows successful teams to upgrade their equipment, creating a feedback loop where effectiveness breeds more effectiveness. And perhaps most importantly, from a psychological standpoint, it may provide Ukrainian drone operators with a mental framework that helps them process the often brutal work they're doing. War is inherently traumatic, and finding ways to maintain morale and mental health among soldiers matters enormously for long-term military effectiveness. Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Oleksandr Syrsky, has spoken publicly about efforts to create layered, defensive drone systems to counter Russian aerial attacks. Just as Ukraine has built a multi-layered offensive approach, Syrsky wants to establish similar depth in defense against Russian Shahed and Giran drones. This requires training more interceptor operators, deploying more radar systems, and fielding more effective counter-drone weapons. The goal is to create overlapping zones of coverage so that Russian drones face multiple layers of defense as they approach their targets. There are reports that Ukraine will soon receive additional drone technology from international partners. A Lithuanian company has reportedly developed an experimental drone with swarming capabilities, meaning multiple units can coordinate their attacks autonomously. If that technology proves effective and reaches Ukraine in meaningful numbers, it could add yet another dimension to Ukraine's aerial warfare capabilities. What we're witnessing is a fundamental shift in how modern warfare is conducted. Drones of various types and capabilities have become absolutely central to operations on both sides of this conflict. They're used for reconnaissance, direct attack, air defense, electronic warfare, and logistics interdiction. The side that innovates faster, adapts more effectively, and deploys these systems more intelligently gains significant advantages. Ukraine appears to be winning that innovation race. The FP2 is just one example, but it's a telling one. Firepoint identified a capability gap in Ukraine's arsenal, developed a cost-effective solution, leveraged existing production infrastructure to accelerate manufacturing, and got the system into combat in a relatively short time frame. That's the kind of rapid innovation cycle that historically has proven decisive in major conflicts. Russia is not standing still, of course. Russian forces have made their own adaptations, including improved FPV drones, fiber optic controlled systems that resist electronic warfare, and new tactics for ambushing Ukrainian vehicles with aerial drones. But the overall trajectory seems to favor Ukrainian innovation. Ukrainian defense companies are nimbler, more willing to experiment, and more responsive to frontline feedback. The Ukrainian military has embraced a culture of rapid adaptation that treats every tactical challenge as a problem to be solved through innovation. The FP2 embodies all of these trends. It fills a critical capability gap. It's cost-effective enough to be produced in meaningful numbers despite Ukraine's resource constraints. It's already in combat and proving effective. And it's part of a larger ecosystem of capabilities that work together synergistically. For Russia, this represents yet another headache in a war that's produced nothing but setbacks and mounting costs. For Ukraine, it's another tool in an increasingly sophisticated toolkit for defending the nation's sovereignty and independence. The coming months will reveal whether Ukraine can sustain this pace of innovation and production. The FP2's long-term impact will depend on how many units reach the battlefield and how effectively they're employed across different operational contexts. but the early evidence suggests Ukraine has once again demonstrated the asymmetric warfare principles that have allowed it to survive and resist against a much larger adversary. Innovation, adaptability, cost-effectiveness, and intelligent employment of technology. These remain Ukraine's greatest advantages, and the FP2 is the latest expression of that strategic approach.